You ever have that feeling where you finish a season of something and your brain just refuses to let it go? Like it's 3 in the morning and you're lying in bed replaying scenes, rewinding conversations in your head, trying to figure out if what you saw was genius or whether you're simply too attached to a fictional teenager who dresses entirely in black. Yeah, Wednesday season 2 did that to me, and here's the thing. This wasn't even supposed to be as good as it is. Season 1 had lightning in a bottle energy, the kind of surprise hit that comes along once in a decade and relights the cultural conversation overnight. Jenna Ortega became a superstar. That Wednesday dance became a meme that outlived 1,000 trends. Netflix broke streaming records. Everyone was watching, and the pressure that creates for a second season. That is brutal. That is the kind of pressure that has destroyed great shows before they ever got a chance to become legends. So when I sat down to watch season 2, I was genuinely nervous. Not excited nervous. Actually nervous. The kind of nervous. The kind of nervous where you're hoping with everything you have that the people in charge didn't fumble it. Because some things are too good to ruin, and this franchise, this character, this world, it deserved better than being a one season wonder. What I found on the other side of that nervousness is something worth talking about for a very long time. So pull up a chair, grab whatever you drink at whatever hour you're watching this, because we are going deep, we are going all the way in. Every layer of this show, every performance, every production decision, every thematic undercurrent, every moment that made me lean forward, and every moment that made me want to throw something at my screen. We are covering all of it today. And if you stick around until the end, and I genuinely hope you do, we are going into full spoiler territory to talk about some of the most jaw-dropping choices this season makes. Choices that are going to divide people. Choices that are absolutely worth arguing about. Let's get into it. So, before we dive into the deep end, let me give you the essentials. Wednesday Season 2 is the second season of Netflix's supernatural mystery drama series, simply titled Wednesday. The show is, of course, based on Wednesday Addams, the iconic character originally created by cartoonist Charles Addams back in 1938. If you grew up watching the Addams Family movies from the 90s or the animated series or even the original television show from the 60s, you already have some relationship with this world. But this version, the Netflix version, takes that legacy character and plants her firmly in a modern, serialized cinematic storytelling framework that feels entirely fresh while still honoring everything that made Wednesday so enduring in the first place. The show was created by Alfred Gough and Miles Millar, the same pair behind the original Smallville series. For those of you with long television memories, Season 1 was directed in large part by Tim Burton, which immediately told you everything you needed to know about the aesthetic direction. Gothic architecture, muted color palettes punctuated by deep blacks and sudden bursts of vivid crimson, a world that feels perpetually autumnal even when the calendar says otherwise. Season 2 expands that visual vocabulary while also bringing in new directorial voices that push the show into unexpected territories. Jenna Ortega returns as Wednesday Addams herself, and let me say right now that her commitment to this role remains one of the most remarkable things happening on television. She is joined by a returning ensemble that includes Gwendolyn Christie, Emma Myers, Hunter Doohan, Joyce Sunday, Percy Hines White, and the always magnetic Catherine Zeta-Jones as Morticia Addams. But season 2 also brings in significant new faces. Steve Buscemi joins the cast in a role that genuinely surprised me. Christopher Lloyd steps into Nevermore's world in a way that feels both nostalgic and completely earned, and the presence of Lady Gaga in a guest arc that became one of the most talked about elements of the entire season. The genre, for anyone new to the show, sits comfortably at the intersection of supernatural mystery, dark coming-of-age drama, and gothic horror comedy. It is tonally ambitious. It wants to be funny and unsettling at the same time. It wants to make you care about characters who are deliberately signed to resist being cared about. And when it works, which in season 2 it does with remarkable consistency, it creates something genuinely special. The central conflict of season 2 revolves around Wednesday returning to Nevermore Academy following the chaos of season one's finale, but the world around her has shifted. The political landscape of the outcast community, the relationship between Nevermore and the normie town of Jericho, the internal power structures of the school itself. All of it has been destabilized by the events of the previous season. Wednesday returns to find that she is no longer simply a student navigating social hierarchies. She is something more complicated than that, a known entity, a person with a reputation, a history of enemies, and a growing understanding of her own powers that she cannot quite control and cannot quite ignore. And then a new mystery begins, something darker than what came before. Something that doesn't just threaten Nevermore or Jericho, but seems to reach back into the deepest history of the outcast world itself. And Wednesday, with her peculiar combination of brilliant intellect and catastrophic interpersonal skills, finds herself at the center of it whether she wants to be or not. This is a show for anyone who ever felt like the odd one out. Anyone who built walls around themselves and then wondered why they felt lonely behind them. Anyone who loved the Gothic aesthetic, not as costume but as emotional language. And of course, anyone who simply enjoys a well crafted mystery with genuine stakes and characters worth investing in. Now, I want to tell you about the first time I hit play on season 2 because it matters. It sets up everything I want to say about how the show operates as an experience. I had cleared my schedule. I'm not embarrassed to say that. I had seen the trailer approximately 7 times because the trailer was genuinely masterfully constructed. It gave you nothing concrete and everything emotionally. You got the visual language, you got the tone, you got Jenna Ortega doing something with her face that communicates 17 different feelings simultaneously, but you got no plot, just texture, just atmosphere, which is either brilliant marketing or a sign that the show knows its own strengths. The opening sequence of season 2 drops you into a nightmare, and I use that word precisely. Wednesday is in the middle of what appears to be a vision, one of those psychic flashes that defined her abilities in season 1, but this one is different. It's more violent, more visceral. The color grading is deeper, almost bruised, like the world has been dipped in something toxic. And Wednesday is not an observer in this vision. She is a participant. She is actively part of whatever horror is unfolding, and she cannot pull herself out. The first 60 seconds of season 2 tells you very clearly that the show is playing for higher stakes than before. It's not messing around with tone setting or gender reintroduction. It throws you into the deep end and trusts that you remember how to swim. When the sequence ends and we get our first proper look at Wednesday standing in what has clearly been a moment of aftermath, completely composed on the outside, internally shaken in a way she would never admit, the show's theme kicks in. And the way the music enters in that moment is worth an entire conversation on its own, which we'll get to. But the point is this, the opening sequence does something that great television openings always do. It promises you something, it makes a commitment. It says, this season we are not going to play it safe. And my very first impression, genuine surprise relief, because the opening of season 2 does not feel like a show that has coasted on its own success. It feels like a show that has taken a long, honest look at what it is and decided to be more of it, harder, darker, funnier in the specific way dark things can be funny when they're honest, more willing to make Wednesday herself uncomfortable. Compare this to something like Stranger Things Season 2, which spent much of its early runtime wrestling with whether it wanted to expand the mythology or repeat the formula. Wednesday Season 2 seems to have made that decision clearly and early. We are expanding. We are going deeper. And if you are not ready for that, the opening sequence is your warning. My expectations going in were genuinely complicated. I loved season 1, but I could see its scaffolding. I could see the places where the mystery mechanics were a little too convenient, where certain characters existed primarily to serve the plot rather than breathe on their own. I was hoping season 2 would sand those rough edges down. What I found was something both better and more interesting than mere improvement. Season 2 has a bolder point of view than season 1. It makes more confident choices, and it earns a significant portion of them. Now, let's talk about the story in a bit more detail, keeping the major surprises intact for those of you who haven't watched yet. The narrative structure of season 2 is primarily linear but layered with Wednesday's psychic visions, which function as a kind of fractured, non-linear element woven through the main timeline. These visions don't just deliver exposition, they're emotionally complex experiences that reflect Wednesday's internal state as much as they reveal external plot information. It's the smart structure choice because it means the show's most fantastical elements are always grounded in character psychology. The season is character driven first and plot driven second. That might surprise people who remember season 1 as being quite mystery forward. Season 2 absolutely has a mystery at its center, a compelling, genuinely layered mystery that builds in complexity as the episodes progress. But the engine running underneath everything is Wednesday's evolving relationships with her family, with her found community at Nevermore, even as she resists calling it that, with her own emerging identity as someone whose powers are growing in ways she doesn't fully understand. One thing season 2 does that I found particularly interesting is it fractures Wednesday's usual emotional armor in a way that season 1 only hinted at. Season 1 established that Wednesday has wars. Season 2 interrogates why those wars are there and what they're actually protecting. And the answer turns out to be more complicated and more vulnerable than the character's surface persona would suggest. The pacing of this season is confident. It runs at what I would call a deliberate slow burn for its first two episodes, establishing the new status quo, reintroducing the ensemble, and planting the seeds of the season's central conflict. From episode 3 onward, it accelerates with real momentum. And there are moments in the middle of the season where it hits genuine thriller velocity without sacrificing character depth. The final three episodes are among the best television this show has produced, which is saying something. I want to be careful about how much I tell you, because the mystery element really does reward coming in fresh. What I will say is this: the central thread of season 2 connects to the history of the outcast world in ways that recontextualize things you thought you understood from season 1. There is a reveal in the middle of this season that made me literally pause the episode, not because it was cheap or shocking for the sake of shock, but because it was correctly set up and I should have seen it coming and didn't. That's good mystery writing. That's the kind of story architecture that makes rewatching feel rewarding rather than frustrating. There is also a subplot involving Wednesday's relationship with her family, particularly her dynamic with Morticia and Gomez, that develops in ways I found genuinely moving. And I say genuinely moving with full awareness that Wednesday Addams would find that phrase nauseating, which is of course the point. There are romantic complications this season too, handled with more maturity and emotional honesty than season 1 managed. And there are moments of genuine horror, not jump scare horror, not gore for gore's sake horror, but the kind of slow dread that builds in the background of scenes until it suddenly occupies the entire frame. Alright, let's get into what this season does really well, because there is a lot. Starting with the performances, because there is genuinely no place else to start. Jenna Ortega as Wednesday Addams in season 2 is a masterclass in physical and emotional restraint. Here's the thing about playing a character whose defining trait is the complete suppression of conventional emotional expression. The danger is that it becomes monotonous, it becomes a trick. It becomes the same face, the same flat delivery, the same deadpan response to everything, and after a while the audience stops finding it interesting because there's nothing beneath it to discover. Ortega solves this problem with extraordinary internal specificity. She is not playing the same Wednesday in every scene. She is playing a Wednesday who is suppressing different things in different scenes. In a conversation with her mother, she is suppressing vulnerability. In a confrontation with an enemy, she is suppressing something closer to real fear. In a moment of unexpected connection with a character she would never admit to caring about, she is suppressing something that looks dangerously like love. And the differences between those suppressions, visible only in the micro movements of her face, the timing of her blinks, the way she holds her shoulders, are what make this performance so compelling to watch. The specific scene I want to point to is somewhere in the middle of the season. during a confrontation that I won't fully describe to avoid spoilers. What I will tell you is that Wednesday is forced into a position where her usual intellectual dominance fails her completely. The answers she would normally reach for aren't there, and what Ortega does in that moment, the very specific quality of her stillness, the fraction of a second where something breaks through before she walls it back up, is some of the best acting on television right now, not just in this show, in anything. Catherine Zeta-Jones as Morticia Addams continues to be one of the most elegant pieces of casting in recent television history. She doesn't simply play Morticia as a Gothic icon, though she is absolutely that. She plays her as a mother who loves her daughter with a ferocity that is all the more powerful for how seldom it's expressed directly. The dynamic between Morticia and Wednesday in season 2 gets more screen time and more emotional real estate than season 1 allowed, and the scenes between Zeta Jones and Ortega carry a weight that genuinely surprised me. There is an episode, I'll just call it the episode in the garden, you will know it when you see it, where these two performers create something so quiet and so devastating that I had to sit with it for a moment before I could continue watching. Emma Myers as Enid Sinclair is a revelation in season 2. Season 1 established Enid as Wednesday's roommate and reluctant friend, and Myers was charming and fun in the role. But season 2 gives Enid real narrative agency and real internal conflict, and Myers meets every beat with complete commitment. There is a version of this character that exists purely as comic relief and warm emotional counterpoint to Wednesday's cold edges. Myers refuses to let Enid be only that. Her performance in the season's second half contains moments of genuine strength and rage and sorrow that caught me completely off guard, and they are all the more affecting for emerging from a character the show had previously kept in the warmth. Now, Steve Buscemi. Where to begin? Steve Buscemi arrives in this season as a new faculty member at Nevermore, and the first thing I want to say is that this is inspired casting. Buscemi has spent 40 years building one of cinema's most distinctive personas, a man who looks like he has seen things he shouldn't have seen, who carries a kind of exhausted knowledge behind his eyes, who can be simultaneously funny and threatening and deeply sympathetic within the same sentence. Season 2 uses all of that. His character, without me giving too much away, is not what he appears to be at first meeting, and a slow unpeeling of who this person actually is. And what his presence at Nevermore actually means is one of the season's most satisfying, long game narrative constructions. There is a scene between Buscemi and Ortega in episode 6 that feels like a chess match conducted to dialogue, and it is spectacular. Christopher Lloyd stepping into this world is a moment of franchise history meeting franchise present. Lloyd, who remains one of cinema's most endlessly watchable performers, brings a quality of ancient, slightly unhinged dignity to his role that is perfect for this universe. Without overplaying it, without making it a cameo in the dismissive sense, he contributes to scenes in ways that feel genuinely essential. And yes, there is at least one moment involving him that will make longtime fans of his career break into enormous grins. The supporting cast continues to shine in ways that reward attention. Gwendolyn Christie as Principal Weems. Well, as the person who has stepped into the void left by Weems, which is a dynamic that season 2 handles carefully and thoughtfully, brings a physicality and authority to her scenes that the show genuinely needs. Hunter Doohan continues to develop his character in directions that feel organic rather than convenience driven. And Joy Sunday in particular gets material this season that allows her to operate on multiple levels simultaneously, which she does with a precision that deserves more attention than it's received. Now, shifting from performances to the story and screenplay itself, the writing in season 2 is noticeably more confident than season 1. This is not a criticism of season 1's writing. It was genuinely good, but there's a difference between writing that is trying to establish something and writing that knows what it is and can therefore play with its own roles. Season 2 writing has that quality. It knows what Wednesday Addams sounds like, thinks like, moves through the world like, and it can build around her with more precision because of that. The dialogue in particular took a significant leap forward. Wednesday's lines in season 1 were sharp and often genuinely funny, but occasionally they tipped into trying a bit too hard. That feeling of conscious effort is largely gone in season 2. The wit feels more natural, more embedded in the character's actual psychology, which makes it land harder. There are several exchanges this season, particularly between Wednesday and a new character whose identity I'll preserve, that crackle with a kind of intellectual sparring energy that is deeply entertaining. One of the boldest screenplay choices the season makes is in how it structures the mystery arc. Rather than keeping the mystery clean and separate from the character work, the writers this season have deliberately intertwined them so that solving the external mystery requires Wednesday to also solve something internal. The clues to what's happening in the outside world also illuminate what's happening inside her. It's elegant. It's the kind of structural thinking that elevates a show from entertaining to genuinely well crafted. The pacing, as I mentioned, takes 2 episodes to fully engage its higher gear. Some viewers will feel this as slowness. I experienced it more as the show understanding that it has 9 or 10 episodes to tell this story and choosing to use the early space for texture and groundwork rather than racing to the plot. By episode 3, that groundwork pays dividends. There are 1 or 2 scenes in the middle of the season where the secondary character plot lines feel slightly less urgent than the main thread, which is probably inevitable given the number of characters the show is servicing, but these are minor disruptions in an otherwise consistently compelling narrative. The season also takes some genuinely unexpected risks with its story. There are choices made in episodes 7 and 8 that I did not see coming, that fundamentally shifted my understanding of several characters and relationships, and that I am deliberately not describing here. What I would say is that these choices feel earned rather than manufactured. They grow from seeds planted in season 1 and watered carefully throughout this season. When they bloom properly. Let's talk about the direction and cinematography because this is where season 2 makes some of its most interesting artistic statements. Tim Burton directed 4 of the 8 episodes in season 1, and his visual fingerprints, the expressionistic angles, the Gothic architecture treated with genuine reverence, the color palette of dead leaves and deep water, define the show's aesthetic identity. For season 2, Burton steps into a more executive role, and new directors come in to handle the individual episodes. The question was whether the visual consistency would survive the transition. The answer is yes, but with interesting evolution. The directors of season 2 have clearly internalized the visual language Burton established, but they've also been given latitude to develop it. The show in season 2 feels visually more dynamic than season 1, which itself was visually impressive. There's more movement, not frantic movement, not action movie movement, but the kind of deliberate, purposeful camera movement that functions as emotional commentary, a slow push toward a character's face during a moment of revelation. A tracking shot that keeps Wednesday at the edge of the frame as the chaos of the school moves through the center, framing choices that consistently, subtly reinforce the thematic content of individual scenes. The color grading has been refined in season 2 in ways that I find genuinely beautiful. Season 1 was famously desaturate, almost monochromatic in its commitment to blacks and grays and deep blues. Season 2 introduces more color, but specifically and meaningfully. The scenes set in Nevermore remain in that cool, controlled palette, but as the mystery deepens and Wednesday's personal world expands, warmer tones begin to infiltrate the frame. It's not a dramatic shift. This isn't the show suddenly going full technicolor. It's subtle, but it's intentional. And if you're paying attention to it, it tells you things about the story that the dialogue never explicitly states. There are 3 sequences this season that I want to call out specifically for their visual execution. The first is the opening nightmare sequence I mentioned earlier, which is short in a way that deliberately disorients spatial logic. You're not sure where you are in the frame, which direction is up, which spaces connect to which order spaces. It creates genuine physical unease, which is exactly what it needs to do. The second is a sequence set in what the show calls the archive, a location I leave mysterious, which is shot almost entirely in a single color of deep amber light that makes everything feel simultaneously warm and deeply wrong. The contrast between the comfort of the color and the horror of what's being discovered in that space is a visual metaphor that works exactly as intended. The third is a scene in the season finale involving a confrontation in the rain. This is all I'll say without spoiling, where the cinematography becomes almost operatic. Wide shots alternating with extreme close ups, the rain functioning as both literal atmosphere and emotional punctuation. It is, without question, the best looking single scene this show has produced. It looks like it cost more than it probably did, which is the highest compliment you can give a television production. Moving on to the music and sound design, because this is an area where season 2 makes a statement I don't think has been fully appreciated. The original score for Wednesday season 2 was composed by Danny Elfman, returning for the second season after his celebrated work on season 1. Elfman and Wednesday Addams are, in some cosmic sense, made for each other. His musical vocabulary, the carnival eeriness, the emotional grandeur hiding beneath self-consciously quirky instrumentation, fits this world like a tailored coat. Season 2 asks more of the score than season 1 did, because the emotional range of the season is broader, and Elfman delivers. The main theme, which you recognize from season 1, undergoes a fascinating evolution in season 2. It's introduced in the first episode in a slightly different harmonic arrangement than we are used to. The same melody, but the harmonization underneath it has shifted in a way that makes it sound familiar and wrong simultaneously. As the season progresses and Wednesday's understanding of her situation changes, the theme evolves with her. By the finale, the theme sounds different enough from its season 1 iteration that the contrast itself becomes emotionally meaningful. It's the same person, transformed by experience. The score is doing narrative work. There is also a piece of music that debuts in episode 4, a relatively brief cue that accompanies a moment of quiet private grief that I found genuinely moving. It's delicate in a way Elfman's work isn't always given credit for being. Small piano figures over strings that don't swell so much as breathe. It creates space. It trusts the silence between notes, which is always a sign of compositional confidence. The sound design throughout season 2 is exceptional in ways that require active listening to fully appreciate. The designers have clearly thought about how each environment should sound, how Nevermore's ancient stone hallways carry sound differently from the modern, anxious streets of Jericho, how Wednesday's psychic visions have their own acoustic signature that is slightly removed from the world's natural sound as if heard through glass or water. There is a specific use of ambient sound in the basement archive sequence I mentioned earlier, subtle, low-frequency drones that you feel more than hear, that creates genuine psychological unease without ever being obviously scary. This is the kind of craft that goes largely unnoticed by most viewers but absolutely shapes the emotional experience of the scene. Good sound design is invisible until you look for it, and then it's everywhere. Regarding action sequences and technical craft, Wednesday Season 2 is not an action show in the traditional sense, but it has several sequences of physical confrontation that are handled with real skill. The choreography of these sequences is character appropriate rather than generic. Wednesday fights like Wednesday statically, with economy of movement without performing for anyone's benefit. There's a sequence in episode 5 involving a confined space and several adversaries that is tight, precise, and surprisingly tense, built less on spectacle than on spatial intelligence. The VFX work this season is noticeably improved from season 1. The supernatural visual effects, the manifestations of outcast powers, the more overtly fantastical elements of the mystery have a texture and integration that feels more convincing than the occasionally rough edges of season 1's effects work. There is a sequence involving water and light in the season 2 finale that is simply beautiful from a pure visual effects standpoint, and it's integrated with the cinematography seamlessly enough that you don't think about it as an effect, you just think about it as a moment. The practical effects work also deserves recognition. The show's makeup department has raised its game considerably. There are practical creature and transformation elements this season that contribute significantly to certain sequences' effectiveness, and the decision to do certain things practically rather than digitally. You know which moments I mean when you see them was absolutely the right call. Alright, now I want to be honest with you because that's the whole point of doing this. Season 2 is very good, but it is not perfect. Let me tell you what didn't quite work. The first genuine criticism I have is about the treatment of a specific supporting character from season 1 who returns this season and is given less to do than their presence suggests they should have. Without naming the character, I'll say that the setup the show builds around this person in the first 3 episodes of season 2 implies a level of narrative involvement that the middle episodes don't deliver. It feels like a plotline that was either cut down or rerouted during production, and the result is a character who has some good scenes but whose arc feels incomplete relative to the show's apparent intentions. It's a wasted opportunity, and it's noticeable because the performer in question is clearly ready to do more with the material than they're given. The second criticism concerns the Jericho subplot. The tension between Nevermore and the Normie town of Jericho was one of season 1's most interesting thematic threads, the show using it to explore ideas about fear of difference, institutional prejudice, and the way communities define themselves against outsiders. Season 2 periodically picks this thread back up, but it does so inconsistently. There are episodes where the gyro dimension feels alive and relevant to what the season is saying. There are others where it seems to have been forgotten. The result is a thematic strand that doesn't develop as cleanly as it should, and the town ultimately feels like set dressing in places where it should feel like world. The third issue, and this one is purely about story mechanics, involves a reveal in episode 7 that, on reflection, requires some fairly significant coincidences to be operative simultaneously. I found myself asking a logistical question about this reveal that episode doesn't answer, and while the episode moves on quickly enough that most viewers will likely not pause on it, I noticed it. And once you notice a plot convenience, it's hard to unnotice it. I want to be clear that this doesn't break the season or damage the emotional integrity of what's being built, but it is a small gear that doesn't quite mesh, and in a season that is otherwise so careful about its story architecture, it stands out a little. The fourth criticism is tonal, and it's perhaps the most interesting to discuss. Wednesday season 2 is at its best, a show that balances dark comedy with genuine emotional weight beautifully. But there are a handful of scenes, particularly in episodes 2 and 3, where the comedy and the drama are in tension rather than harmony. Moments where a scene has built real emotional momentum, and then a joke deflates it in a way that feels less like wit and more like the show flinching from its own sincerity. Season 1 had this problem slightly more acutely, and season 2 has largely solved it, but the occasional instance remains. These are real criticisms, and I want to be specific about them precisely because this is such a good season. When something is mediocre, you list problems and move on. When something is genuinely excellent, the imperfections are worth examining because they reveal the gap between what the show is and what it could be. Season 2 is very close to being something truly exceptional. The places where it falls short of that mark are worth talking about honestly. None of these flaws, let me be absolutely clear, diminish the overall quality of what's here. They are the difference between an 8 and a 9, not the difference between good and bad. Now let's step away from the critical perspective for a moment and go behind the camera, because the story of how season 2 was made is genuinely fascinating, and understanding it adds something real to the experience of watching. The development of season 2 began essentially the week after season 1's premiere numbers came in. Netflix had a massive hit on its hands, the kind of massive that restructures planning conversations at the executive level, and the pressure to capitalize on that success quickly was enormous. Alfred Goff and Miles Millar, the showrunners, have spoken publicly about walking a very deliberate line between responding to what audiences loved about season 1 and resisting the temptation to simply replicate it. Their stated goal for season 2 was to go deeper rather than bigger, to make a season that rewarded the emotional investment of the audience rather than merely rewarding their appetite for more of the same surface pleasures. That is, as goals go, both admirable and difficult. And the fact that they largely achieved it is a testament to the strength of the creative vision at the top of the production. One of the most significant production decisions for season 2 was the choice to bring in new directing voices. Tim Burton, who directed 4 of season one's 8 episodes and defined the show's visual identity more than anyone, moved into a more executive producer role for season 2. This wasn't a departure or a falling out. Burton has spoken warmly about the show and his continued involvement with it. It was simply a creative evolution. New directors were brought in with specific instructions to both honor the visual language Burton established and to develop it in their own directions. The result is a season that feels visually continuous with season 1, but also more diverse in its directorial approach, which creates a subtle energy across episodes that keeps the season from feeling repetitive. The casting of Steve Buscemi is a story worth telling. Buscemi was not the first choice for his role. There were reportedly several conversations with other actors before the writers and producers landed on Buscemi as the ideal fit. And the reason they chose him, according to production discussions, comes down to something specific about how he holds the camera's attention. Buscemi has an extremely rare quality among character actors. He can be entirely still and entirely compelling simultaneously. He doesn't need to do much to fill a scene. This is critically important for his character in season 2, whose function in the early episodes is to seem completely ordinary in a world where nothing is ordinary. He needed to be someone the audience could look at and think, perfectly normal person, nothing to see here, and simultaneously, someone experienced viewers would trust enough to suspect immediately. Buscemi, uniquely, can do both of those things with the same expression. Once you know he's in the cast, your brain won't let you accept him as just another Nevermore faculty member. The tension between what you know about the actor and what the show is asking you to accept about the character is doing narrative work before he says a single word. Jenna Ortega's preparation for season 2 reportedly went into some fascinating territory. She spent considerable time working with movement coaches to develop what I describe as Wednesday's upgraded physicality for this season. Season 1's Wednesday moved with a kind of deliberate, performative strangeness. The walk, the posture, the stillness, all very consciously calculated. Season 2's Wednesday still has all of that, but Ortega has integrated something new into the physical vocabulary, a quality of barely suppressed energy, as if something underneath the controlled surface is pushing to get out. This is entirely consistent with the season's thematic content. Wednesday's powers are growing, her control is being tested. The lid on what she is doesn't quite fit as well as it did. The physical performance communicates this before the writing tells you anything about it. That is sophisticated work. The filming locations for season 2 represent an interesting evolution from season 1. The first season was largely filmed in Romania, specifically in Bucharest and the surrounding region, which gave the show its distinctive European Gothic texture, the architecture, the light, the scale of the environments, all contributing to a world that felt genuinely old and slightly alien. Season 2 expanded the filming geography significantly. Additional locations in Ireland, Portugal, and at expanded studio facilities in the UK added new visual dimensions to the world. The Irish shooting locations contribute to some of the season's most striking outdoor imagery, particularly in the sequences involving open water and coastal landscapes that become significant in the season's second half. There's a quality to the light in those shots, cooler, more diffuse, with a particular quality of gray-green that digital reproduction can't entirely replicate, that gives certain sequences of season 2 an almost painterly quality. The production faced some genuine challenges during filming. A period of disrupted shooting in the second unit apparently led to some sequences being restructured, and there are reports of additional photography being conducted late in the production cycle that affected the schedule. The visual effects team had to work under considerable time pressure to complete the season's more ambitious sequences, and while the results are largely excellent, the team has spoken about certain shots where the original vision had to be simplified due to timeline constraints. Whether you can see the seams in the final product is a matter of what you're looking for, but it's worth noting that what's on screen represents an achievement under real production pressure. The collaboration between the VFX team and the cinematography department on season 2 was apparently unusually close, with visual effects supervisors on set from very early in production rather than being brought in post-shooting to solve problems. This integrated approach, designing scenes with the effects work in mind from the beginning rather than treating them as separate phases, shows in the quality of the integration, particularly in the sequences involving Wednesday's psychic visions, where the seamlessness between the practical shoot and the digital embellishment is remarkable. The budget for season 2 represented a significant increase from season 1, with Netflix reportedly investing heavily in the production given the cultural importance of the show. A substantial portion of this additional budget went into the expanded location shooting, the enhanced practical effects work, and the music. Danny Elfman's score for season 2 is a larger compositional undertaking than season 1's, with more dramatic material, a larger orchestral palette, and a more integrated relationship between the score and the sound design. There were no major controversies during the season 2 production in the tabloid sense, but there was a period of significant social media speculation about the show's direction following some early leaked set photos. These photos suggested a storyline that many fans interpreted as being a departure from established character relationships, and the conversation online became rather heated for a few weeks. When the season finally aired, the context of those photos became clear, and the fan anxiety largely proved to be misdirected. The show's handling of that particular element was actually more nuanced than the leaked imagery suggested, which is a testament to how much the framing and editing of individual moments can change their meaning. A genuinely delightful piece of trivia, a significant prop used in the season's second half, a specific object that becomes central to the mystery, was built practically rather than created digitally, and the craftspeople who built it reportedly spent 8 weeks on its construction. It appears on screen for a total of maybe 3 to 4 minutes across the season. But those minutes are important, and the physical reality of the object, the fact that Jenna Ortega was actually holding and interacting with a real thing, contributes something to the scenes involving it that digital fabrication wouldn't have provided. You can see it. You can't quite name what you are seeing, but the physical weight and presence of an actual constructed object registers differently in performance and in camera. The show also worked extensively with dialect coaches for several of the new cast members in season 2, particularly those playing characters from within the deeper outcast history, whose manner of speaking needed to communicate both temporal and cultural distance without tipping into parody. The work is subtle enough that most viewers won't consciously register it, but it contributes to the world building in meaningful ways. Now let's talk about how this season was received both critically and by general audiences, because the reception story for season 2 is genuinely interesting in ways that go beyond simple numbers. Season 2 premiered on Netflix and, much like season 1 before it, landed as an immediate cultural event. Netflix's own viewing metrics placed it among the platform's most watched seasons in the immediate weeks following release, though the numbers represented a slight decrease from the extraordinary heights of season 1. This is essentially the expected trajectory for a hit show's follow-up. The surprise factor that drove season 1's explosive debut cannot be replicated, and a somewhat moderated but still enormous audience for season 2 is entirely the realistic ceiling. Critical reception was strong but nuanced in ways that I find more interesting than simple praise or simple disappointment. Most major outlets received the season warmly, with particular praise directed at Jenna Ortega's expanded performance, the improved visual effects, and the season's more emotionally ambitious story. The consensus among professional critics positioned season 2 as a genuine improvement on season 1 in terms of thematic coherence and character development, while acknowledging some of the structural issues I've already discussed. There was, and this is worth noting, a small but vocal critical contingent that found season 2's darker tone to be a step in the wrong direction, that felt the show was losing some of the playful, fleet-footed quality that made season 1 so accessible and crowd-pleasing. I understand this perspective even if I disagree with it. Season 2 is a more serious show than season 1. It asks more of the viewer. And there is a legitimate question about whether that trade-off serves the audience that fell in love with the first season. My answer is yes, it serves them, it respects their intelligence and their investment, but I appreciate that this is genuinely debatable. General audience reception was, if anything, more enthusiastic than critical reception. Social media engagement around season 2 was substantial and largely positive, with particular attention paid to specific performances, specific sequences, and specific story choices that generated the kind of passionate fan discussion that streaming shows increasingly rely on for their cultural presence. The discourse around season 2 stayed in the conversation for several weeks after the premiere, which in the current fractured media landscape is a significant achievement. There was a modest but interesting gap between critical and audience reception that I think reflects something real about the season's ambitions. The critics who are slightly cooler on season 2 were often pointing at the structural issues, the occasional pacing dip, the underdeveloped supporting character I mentioned, that require a certain kind of critical distance to notice. General audiences, watching for character and emotion and mystery, who are largely experiencing the season through the lens of its considerable strengths, and those strengths are considerable enough to generate genuine enthusiasm. Awards conversations around Wednesday season 2 are significant and well deserved. Jenna Ortega's performance generated serious Emmy discussion, and the show's production design and cinematography found recognition in technical award circles. Whether those conversations translate into trophies is always uncertain, but the fact that season 2 was taken seriously as an awards contender reflects its genuine quality as television craft. Wednesday, as a franchise, considered in this broader context, has established itself as one of the defining shows of its era of streaming television. It sits alongside shows like Squid Game, Stranger Things, and The Crown as a Netflix production that has achieved genuine cultural weight rather than merely algorithmic success. That positioning gives season 2 a significance beyond its individual merits. It is part of a body of work that will define how this period of television is remembered. Now, thinking about where season 2 sits within the broader franchise picture, it is a better season than season 1. I want to say that clearly and without hedging because I think it's true and I think it's worth saying. Season 1 was a remarkable first season of television. It established a world, a character, a tone, and a visual language that were all genuinely fresh and well executed. It launched Jenna Ortega's career into a completely different stratosphere. It broke Netflix records. It became a genuine cultural phenomenon. It did all of this while also having some of the inevitable rough edges of a fast season, character dynamics still finding their rhythm, mystery mechanics occasionally too convenient, the balance between comedy and drama not always perfectly calibrated. Season 2 takes everything Season 1 established and develops it with the confidence of a creative team that knows exactly what they have. The rough edges are smoother, the character work is deeper, the emotional stakes are more genuinely felt, the mystery is more elegantly constructed, the production values are higher across every department. Where Season 1 felt like the best possible version of a show figuring itself out, Season 2 feels like the best possible version of a show that has figured itself out, and that is a meaningful distinction. In terms of what it sets up for Season 3, which has already been confirmed, Season 2 does responsible work. It resolves the central mystery of its own season completely and satisfyingly, which is critical. Nothing is more frustrating than a season of television that withholds its own resolution in service of manufactured franchise momentum. Season 2 earns its ending, and within that resolution, it plants seeds, carefully, almost invisibly, for what comes next. Characters are positioned differently at the end of season 2 than they were at the beginning, in ways that open genuine new narrative territory. The world feels expanded. The possibilities feel real. The overall legacy of this franchise in the broader cultural conversation comes down to something simple. It understood what the character of Wednesday Addams was always really about. She was never just about being weird or dark or different. She was about the experience of being too much for the world around you, too smart, too intense, too unwilling to perform happiness for others' comfort, too honest in ways that make people uncomfortable. Every person who has ever felt like they were operating on a different frequency than everyone around them, like their internal experience didn't match the social script they were handed, they found something in Wednesday Addams. The show honors that identification, it takes it seriously. It doesn't laugh at Wednesday or condescend to her or insist that she needs to be fixed. It asks what it would look like if someone like that found their people. And it answers that question with real thoughtfulness and real feeling. That's why this franchise matters. That's why it will last. And now let's go deeper into what this season is actually saying beneath the surface. Because there is a lot happening thematically in season 2 that I think deserves real attention. The most prominent theme of season 2 is the relationship between power and self knowledge. Wednesday is, this season, in the process of understanding what she actually is, not in the surface sense of teenage outcast at a school for supernatural beings, but in the deeper sense of what her capabilities mean, where they come from, and what responsibility they carry. This is a theme that the show handles with real intelligence because it refuses to frame power as simply a positive thing. Wednesday's growing abilities are presented as genuinely double edged. They give her access to information and agency that she wouldn't otherwise have, but they also expose her to experiences and responsibilities that she cannot control or choose to opt out of. Power in this season is not a gift so much as a condition, and the question the show keeps asking is, what do you do with the condition you didn't choose? This connects directly to the second major theme, which is identity and the performance of self. Wednesday has, since the character's inception, been someone who performs her own nature quite deliberately. The deadpan, the wardrobe, the studied refusal of convention and social warmth, these are choices as much as they are genuine expressions. Season 2 complicates this by examining what happens when the performance and the authentic self begin to diverge. As when these experiences this season force her into emotional territory she has not mapped and cannot fully control, she has to figure out what Wednesday Addams actually is when she's not performing Wednesday. Addams actually is when she's not performing Wednesday. It's a remarkably sophisticated thing for a show about supernatural teenagers to be exploring, and it's handled with a delicacy that surprised me. The theme of community and belonging runs through the entire season in a way that is both explicitly addressed in the dialogue and embedded in the visual storytelling. Nevermore Academy as an institution represents the fundamental human need to find your tribe, to be somewhere you are not required to diminish yourself to fit in. But season 2 complicates this by examining the ways that communities built around shared outsider starters can develop their own internal hierarchies, their own exclusions, their own mechanisms of power and belonging. The outcast community is not automatically just and egalitarian simply because it was founded on the premise of acceptance. People bring their baggage with them, and the season's central mystery is, in part, about the dark things that the outcast community has done and hidden in its own history in order to preserve its institutional safety. This connects to something genuinely interesting in the show's political subtext. Without being heavy handed about it, season 2 is engaging with ideas about how minority communities, communities formed around shared difference from a dominant culture, relate to their own histories of survival motivated compromise. The things the outcast world did to protect itself are not clean things. They involve choices that hurt individuals for the sake of institutional survival. And the show is asking, through Wednesday's investigation, whether the community's future can be built honestly on those foundations or whether the hidden past needs to be confronted. This is not a small set of ideas for a Netflix supernatural drama to be working with, and the fact that it's doing so without being preachy or reducing complex ideas to simple moral algebra is genuinely impressive. The symbolism embedded in the season's visual language is worth paying attention to. Water appears repeatedly across the season as a motif in the psychic visions, in the mystery ski locations, in several of the season's most emotionally significant scenes. Water in this show functions as a symbol of the unconscious, of what is hidden beneath the controlled surface, of the depths of self that Wednesday both relies on and fears. As her powers grow and her emotional experience becomes less controllable, water imagery becomes more prominent. By the season's finale, it is everywhere. If you go back and look at the early episodes, knowing the season's ending, the water imagery is almost too obvious. It's a sophisticated piece of symbolic architecture. The color black deserves its own discussion. Wednesday's wardrobe. Uniformly, Deliberately black is the most obvious symbolic statement the show makes, but season 2 does something interesting with it. There are moments, very few, very carefully placed, where the framing of Wednesday places her in environments where black is not the dominant color, where she is visually surrounded by warmth or brightness or color. And in those moments, the visual contrast tells you something about the emotional state the show is working toward. Wednesday in black against a colorful world is isolation made beautiful. Wednesday in black beginning to notice the colors around her, still in black, still herself, but noticing its growth made visible. Think about what the show is really saying at its core, and I think you arrive here, that being deeply, fundamentally yourself, not performing softness you don't feel, not suppressing darkness you actually have, not pretending to be less than you are, is not incompatible with connection. That the right kind of love and community doesn't ask you to be less yourself, it asks you to be more. Wednesday Addams, across 2 seasons of this show, doesn't become a warmer person in the conventional sense. She doesn't become softer or more emotionally available in ways that would satisfy a conventional coming of age narrative. What she becomes is more honest, more willing to acknowledge, even privately, that connection matters, more able to let the people she has chosen into the parts of herself she would prefer to keep locked up. She doesn't change who she is, she becomes more fully what she already was. And there is something genuinely moving about that arc, executed across 2 seasons of television with real consistency and real care. Now, connecting this to the real world, the show's themes resonate with something happening broadly in contemporary culture around authenticity, the burden of visibility, the complicated experience of having your authentic self be something that the dominant culture treats as threatening or aberrant. Wednesday Addams has always been, for many people, a figure of identification for exactly this reason. Season two's deeper engagement with what that identification actually means, what it costs, what it enables, what it requires of the person living it, makes the show more than entertainment. It makes it something genuinely useful to people who see themselves in it. Let's talk about cultural impact for a moment, because the Wednesday franchise at this point has had enough of it to be worth examining seriously. Season 1's cultural moment was extraordinary. The viral spread of the Wednesday dance film to Lady Gaga's Bloody Mary and subsequently used in literally millions of TikTok reproductions was the kind of organic cultural phenomenon that studios would give anything to manufacture but cannot. It happened because Jenna Ortega's physicality in that scene was so distinctive, so strange, so genuinely expressive that people felt compelled to engage with it. The dance became shorthand for a particular quality of controlled, deliberate oddness that resonated with an enormous number of people. It became, in a real sense, a cultural signal, a way of saying, I see this character. I am, in some sense, this character. Season 2 had to exist in the cultural shadow of that specific phenomenon, which is an unusual challenge. It could not repeat the dance moment because nothing repeated is accidental. What it did instead was build toward a different kind of cultural conversation, less about a single viral moment and more about a sustained episode to episode engagement with the season's story and performances that kept the show in the social media conversation across its entire run. The arrival of Lady Gaga in season 2's guest art generated enormous cultural attention before the season even aired. Gaga's relationship to the Wednesday franchise had been established through the viral dance, making her appearance in the show a genuinely self-aware piece of metacasting that the show handles with real wit. Her scenes, and I'll be more specific about her role in the spoiler section, brought a particular quality of theatrical commitment to the show that elevated the sequences she was part of. She's not in the show as window dressing, she is doing work, and the work is very good. The conversation season 2 sparked about the show's themes, particularly around the ideas I discussed in the previous section about community identity and the politics of outsider belonging, was more substantive than most streaming show discourse. There were genuine, thoughtful conversations in cultural criticism spaces about what the show was saying and how well it was saying it. Whether those conversations will calcify into the kind of durable cultural consideration that makes certain shows genuinely important over time remains to be seen. But the fact that they happened at all for a show of this genre is significant. The show's influence on the broader landscape of streaming television is also worth noting. Wednesday Season 1's success directly accelerated the development of several competing projects, most visibly in the supernatural coming-of-age genre space. The number of shows that went into development in 2023 and 2024 with clearly Wednesday-adjacent aesthetics and premises is not coincidental. Some of those shows found their own identities, others were more obviously derivative. What Wednesday's success demonstrated was that there was a large, enthusiastic audience for Gothic, character driven genre storytelling that was willing to be emotionally invested in deeply strange characters. That is not a small lesson, and the streaming landscape is still absorbing it. Alright, I promised you spoilers, and now we deliver. If you have not seen Wednesday Season 2 yet, this is your warning. Right now, pause, go watch it, come back when you're done. Trust me, the things I'm about to tell you are genuinely better experienced blind. For those of you who've seen the season, let's talk about everything. The central mystery of Season 2 eventually reveals that the threat is not an external entity attacking the outcast world, but something that grew from within it. The antagonist, whose identity the season builds toward with impressive patience, is a former Nevermore student, someone who went through the same institution Wednesday is now navigating, and whose history with the school is the key to understanding what has been driving the season's events. The specific reveal that I mentioned earlier, the one in episode 7 that made me pause, is the disclosure that this character was not simply a victim of Nevermore's past decisions, but was actively shaped by them in ways that the school's current administration either didn't know or chose not to acknowledge. The institution's historical moral compromises, the choices made to protect the community at individual cost, created the conditions for what is now threatening to destroy it. It is a genuinely sophisticated cause and effect construction, and the fact that it's been earning its way since the very beginning of the season makes the reveal feel satisfying rather than convenient. The specific coincidence that I found slightly strained, and I can be more precise now, involves the timing of when certain documents were destroyed and when Wednesday discovers their remnants. For the revealer to work perfectly, two independent chains of events need to have concluded at almost exactly the right moment to leave exactly the evidence that Wednesday finds. It works narratively. It just requires slightly too many things to have happened in exactly the right sequence for comfort. Steve Buscemi's character, Principal Barry Dort, is one of Season 2's most carefully constructed narrative misdirections. When Dort arrives at Nevermore as the new headmaster following the events of Season 1, the show leans into his loudness, his flamboyance, and his aggressive promotion of what he calls outcast pride. A kind of performative institutional enthusiasm that feels, frankly, suspicious from the first minute. The character is designed to occupy your suspicion. He is eccentric in a way that reads as covering something. He is warm in a way that feels calculated, and the show lets you sit with that suspicion for several episodes, feeding it just enough to keep it alive. Here's what makes it interesting. Dort is not the primary villain. He is something more complicated than that. His arc across the season reveals a person who genuinely believes in what he is doing for the outcast community, whose enthusiasm for Nevermore and its students is real, but whose past contains a secret that implicates him in the historical moral compromises the season is centrally concerned with. He didn't create a wound, but he helped hide it. And when that distinction becomes clear, the show asks a genuinely difficult question. Is there a meaningful moral difference between committing a wrong and spending years ensuring that no one discovers it? Buscemi plays the unraveling of this character with extraordinary precision. The scene where Dort finally confronts what he has spent decades avoiding is one of the best performances in the entire season. There is a specific quality of exhausted guilt in what Buscemi does in those minutes. The look of a person who has been carrying a weight so long they forgot they were carrying it until the moment it is finally taken out of their hands. Now let's talk about the real villain of Season 2, because this is where the season makes its most audacious storytelling choice. The central antagonist of season 2 is a character the show initially introduces as Slurp, a mysterious, unsettling presence that Wednesday and her circle become aware of in the season's early episodes through a series of disturbing incidents around Nevermore. The name itself is a deliberate piece of misdirection. Something that sounds faintly ridiculous and therefore doesn't carry the weight of genuine threat in the way the show intends for the audience to underestimate it. That is, of course, the point. The reveal, and this is the one I mentioned earlier that made me literally pause the episode, is that Slurp is Isaac Knight, a dead scientist, a former Nevermore student and academic who died decades ago during an incident that Nevermore buried in its history and never spoke of again. Resurrected, driven by a combination of unfinished scientific obsession and genuine, consuming fury at the people whose choices led to his death. The name Knight is, and I love this, an anagram of thing. The title, once you know it, recontextualizes the very name of a character who has been in this show since the pilot. It is elegant, hidden storytelling. The backstory the season reveals about Isaac is genuinely dark and genuinely sad in equal measure. Isaac was a brilliant scientist at Nevermore who became obsessed with removing supernatural abilities from outcast individuals who didn't want them, specifically focused on a woman named Francoise whose high nature she found unbearable, whose son Tyler would inherit those same qualities decades later. Isaac built a device powered by the electrokinetic energy of his best friend Gomez, Wednesday's father, to accomplish this extraction, knowing the process would likely kill Gomez, activating it anyway. Think about that. This is not a story about a monster who was always a monster. This is a story about a brilliant person who loved someone enough to want to free them from pain and loved that goal so much more than he loved the friend standing between him and it. That is a tragedy. That is the kind of villain origin that makes a story genuinely morally complicated rather than simply dramatically convenient. Morticia saved Gomez by bursting in and severing Isaac's hand, triggering the explosion that killed Isaac but spared Francoise. The couple then buried Isaac at the location he had intended as Gomez's grave, the Skull Tree. A genuinely dark piece of symmetry that the show handles with real narrative restraint, because the revelation of this history is delivered not as dramatic exposition but as a quiet, private conversation between Morticia and Wednesday. A mother telling her daughter what the world actually looks like beneath the surface she has always presented. It is one of the most affecting scenes in the entire season. And now, the piece of the story that made me audibly react when it clicked into place. Thing, the disembodied hand that has been a beloved part of the Addams family universe since the very beginning of the franchise, the character who has served as Wednesday's loyal companion, her messenger, her silent co-conspirator across both seasons of this show. Thing is, Isaac's severed hand. The supercharged explosion that killed Isaac animated his severed right hand, which Morticia and Gomez discovered had no memory of who it had been. They took it in, they raised it in their particular way as part of the family. Ha! I want you to sit with what this means narratively. Every scene in which Teen has helped Wednesday, every moment of loyalty and protective instinct and fierce love that this character has expressed across 2 seasons of television. Every time Teen has been essentially the truest and most uncomplicated expression of what love looks like in the Addams household. All of it came from something that was, in its previous life, the instrument of Gomez's near death. The Adams family took the most direct physical expression of what almost killed their patriarch and they loved it into something completely different. That is either the most beautiful or the most disturbing thing this show has done, and I genuinely cannot decide which. The finale's climax resolves this storyline in a way that is almost operatic in its emotional logic. Isaac, fully resurrected and having reclaimed control of Thing by forcibly reattaching his animated hand to his body, is at his most powerful, strengthened by the reunification of himself, pursuing his original goal with renewed ferocity, and it is Thing who ultimately defeats him, not Wednesday, not the combined Addams family force. Thing individually in what the show frames as an act of pure chosen identity. Isaac commands the hand as part of himself. The Adams family pleads with it to remember who it chose to be, and Thing chooses. That is excellent storytelling. The resolution of a season long mystery through a character choice, not a fight, not a clever plan, not a power, but through the specific moral agency of a being who was never supposed to have moral agency at all. It earns everything it asks you to feel. Lady Gaga's appearance in episode 6 of season 2 as Rosalind Rothwood is another piece of the season's layered mystery architecture. Wednesday discovers that Rothwood was a Nevermore professor whose work touched on the same territory as Isaac's, the intersection of supernatural ability and the science of extraction and manipulation. To access her knowledge, Wednesday visits Rothwood's grave, and Rothwood, being a Nevermore faculty member with the particular qualities such people tend to have, is naturally not entirely gone just because she died. Gaga's performance in this sequence has a quality that I found genuinely surprising, not because Gaga is not a talented performer, we know very well that she is, but because the show doesn't ask her to be Lady Gaga. It asks her to be a specific, ancient, weary, intensely purposeful woman whose life's work is the thing that Wednesday needs to understand. And Gaga delivers that. There is no performance artifice, no star charisma deployed as a substitute for characterization. She simply is this person in this scene doing the scene's work. The creative decision to cast her here, to complete the loop of a connection that began when her music became the unofficial soundtrack of season 1's most iconic moment, is genuinely inspired meta storytelling. And the execution justifies the decision completely. The ending of season 2 is where the show makes its boldest and most controversial choice, and I want to talk about it carefully and thoroughly because it deserves that. Enid Sinclair, Wednesday's best friend, the warm, vivid, achingly human counterpoint to Wednesday's cold precision, transforms in the season finale into what the show calls a permanent alpha werewolf. The circumstances of this transformation involve Enid making a deliberate choice to prevent Wednesday's premonition from coming true. All season, Wednesday has been haunted by a vision of Enid's death. The entire season has been structured, in part, around Wednesday trying to outmaneuver her own prophecy, using the same brilliant analytical mind that solves external mysteries to try to prevent an internal catastrophe. And when the moment of crisis arrives, Enid solves it herself by going somewhere beyond the person she was, by choosing something permanent and irreversible to save the people she loves. The show frames this with characteristic emotional restraint. It does not present Enid's transformation as a simple victory. The final image we have of Enid at season's end is ambiguous in exactly the right way. She's alive. She's powerful. She has done what she needed to do, but she may not be able to come back from it in the human sense. The werewolf who emerges from that transformation is not quite the Enid we have spent 2 seasons loving, and the show has the honesty to let that be genuinely devastating rather than heroically triumphant. This is a choice that will divide audiences. Some viewers will find it deeply affecting, the idea that love sometimes costs the person who loves most, that saving someone can mean losing yourself in a way that cannot be undone. Others will feel it is unnecessarily punishing to a character who was already carrying enormous narrative weight this season, and that the show is being darkly convenient with one of its warmest and most beloved characters. I personally find it devastating in the best possible way. The scene between Wednesday and what Enid has become at the end of the finale. Wednesday, who has spent 2 seasons building the specific walls she has built precisely to avoid feeling exactly what she is feeling in this moment, confronted with the cost of her own significance to someone else, is the scene the entire season was building toward. It is not a mystery resolution, it is an emotional one. Wednesday's final action in the closing scene is also worth examining for what it tells us about where season 3 is going. She sets off with Uncle Fester to find Enid, implicitly to understand what happened to her friend and whether there is any way back. But she is also carrying with her a journal belonging to Aunt Ophelia, a character revealed this season to be not dead as assumed but hidden, and alive, and whose journal contains sketches that trigger a new psychic vision in Wednesday confirming Ophelia's survival. The specific framing of this closing scene is that of a person choosing to stay in motion. Wednesday does not return to Nevermore, does not seek the safety of Nevermore's walls, does not let the resolution of the season's central conflict become an excuse for stillness. She goes looking for her friend, for her aunt, for the next thing. And this is thematically the perfect closing note for a season that has been centrally about self knowledge and what you do once you have it. Wednesday has learned, this season, who she is and what she cares about and what it costs her. The final image is of her choosing to act from that knowledge rather than retreat from it. There is also a post credits moment, brief, deliberately cryptic, that plants a seed for season 3 involving the Raven connections, hinted at in Ophelia's journal, and what they imply about the Addams family legacy more broadly. I won't describe it beyond that because even for the spoiler section that feels like giving too much away for something still in its most intriguing early stages. What I will say is that it suggests season 3 is going to expand the show's mythology in directions that feel genuinely new rather than merely iterative. My personal reaction to the ending is one of quiet, sustained admiration with a thin undercurrent of grief. The grief is for Enid specifically. 2 seasons of loving that character, watching Emma Myers build something warm and specific and irreplaceable, and then watching the show test that character at the deepest possible level and leave the result genuinely uncertain. That is brave storytelling. It does not feel manipulative because the season has earned every emotional beat that leads to it. But it does ache. It should ache. And the satisfaction, the deep structural satisfaction that I look for in long form storytelling and don't always find, comes from the clarity of the thematic architecture. Every question this season asked, it answered, not always with a comfortable answer, but with an honest one. That is rarer than it should be. Now, let me step outside the analytical frame for a moment. Let me just talk to you about what it was like to watch this. I started Wednesday season 2 on a Tuesday evening with no particular plan to do anything other than watch one episode and get a feel for where the season was going. I watched all of it, not in one sitting. I broke around 2 in the morning and finished the next day, but it was the kind of viewing experience where stopping felt like a physical inconvenience rather than a natural pause point the show holds. It holds consistently across the entire season in a way that is genuinely not common at this level of genre television. There is a scene in the middle of the season, episode 5 I believe, where Wednesday is alone in her room at a moment when everything she has been building toward has momentarily collapsed. No mystery lead, no allies she trusts, no next move that she can see clearly. And the scene is 3 minutes of Jenna Ortega doing essentially nothing. She sits at her cello. She starts to play something she clearly wrote herself, something that is not performed for anyone, that exists entirely for the private function of managing feeling, and the camera just stays with her. Doesn't cut away, doesn't add dialogue, doesn't add anything. I haven't been able to get that scene out of my head since. Not because it's the most dramatic moment in the season, not because anything of external significance happens in it, but because it told me more about who Wednesday Addams actually is, the living, feeling, privately struggling person underneath the performance, than any amount of expository dialogue or action sequence could have managed. It's the kind of moment that only exists in a show that trusts its lead performer completely and trusts its audience to stay with a quiet thing. I would watch this season again specifically to be in that scene again. Would I rewatch the whole season? Yes, without question, and probably more than once. There is a category of television that reveals new things on rewatch because the structural architecture is complex enough that knowing the ending changes what the beginning means. Wednesday season 2 is that category of show. The seeds planted in the first 2 episodes, the specific language used in certain conversations, the visual choices that gain retrospective significance. A rewatch is not simply repetition, it is a different experience. And I don't say that lightly because my time is, like yours, finite. What kind of viewer gets the most out of this season? Someone who is willing to invest. Someone who doesn't need every episode to be an escalation in action or event, who can appreciate the quieter episodes for the groundwork they're doing. Someone who genuinely cares about character psychology and is willing to follow emotional logic as carefully as they follow plot logic. Someone who finds the Gothic aesthetic not alienating but genuinely expressive, who understands that the visual language of darkness and architecture and shadow is doing emotional work, not just aesthetic work. There is also something specific I want to say about viewers who have ever felt like the Wednesday I desecrated or described earlier in this video. People who have felt too much or thought too differently or built too many walls and then wondered about the cost. This season has something real for you. It doesn't offer easy comfort. It doesn't tell you that if you just open up enough, everything will resolve itself into warmth and connection and light. What it tells you is more honest than that. It tells you that self knowledge, genuine, unflinching self knowledge, is worth the price, and that the people worth having in your life are the ones who don't ask you to be less yourself to keep them. That is a thing worth being told, and this season tells it beautifully. There is a specific line in the season finale that I am going to refrain from quoting directly out of respect for the copyright, but it is a line that Wednesday says to Enid in the last moments they share before the transformation. It is 14 words. It is the most direct, unguarded, emotionally honest thing Wednesday says to another person in 2 full seasons of this show. And the way Jenna Ortega says it quietly, looking somewhere other than at Enid, as if she cannot quite allow herself the vulnerability of eye contact in this moment, turned a phrase that on the page might have landed as simply sweet into something I felt somewhere below my sternum. I have watched television for most of my life. I have seen a lot of finales. That 14-word line is in my top 10 moments of television this decade. I mean that. Alright, let's bring this home. Wednesday season 2 is, to put it directly and without hedging, one of the best seasons of genre television produced in the last several years. It earns that description not by being flashy or spectacular in the ways that are easy to photograph and put in trailers, but by being rigorously committed to the harder work, character depth, thematic coherence, emotional honesty, and the willingness to make bold choices and then fully commit to their consequences. It is a better season than season 1, which was already exceptional. It is proof that a creative team in full command of their material can take a show that has already found enormous success and choose to deepen it rather than coast on it. A choice, and the quality of the execution that follows from it is worth celebrating loudly. Who will love this season most? People who invested emotionally in season 1 and want to see that investment rewarded with genuine character development rather than formula repetition. People who love Gothic aesthetics, mystery storytelling, and the specific pleasure of a show that trusts its audience to keep up. Fans of Jenna Ortega's work who will find here the most expansive and demanding performance she has given in this role, and anyone who appreciates the specific kind of genre television that uses supernatural mechanics to explore real human emotional truth, because that is precisely what this show does at its best, who might not connect as strongly. Viewers who came to season 1 primarily for the fun, lighter touch supernatural adventure energy may find season two's darker and more emotionally complex orientation a tonal shift that doesn't suit them. There's nothing wrong with that preference, but this season is not primarily trying to be fun. It is trying to be true, and those are different goals. Is it worth watching on streaming? Without question. This is actually a show that benefits from the streaming format, from the ability to watch episodes consecutively when the mystery is building momentum, from the option to go back and rewatch specific scenes, from the pause button that lets you stay with a quiet moment rather than cutting away when a network schedule demands. Watch it on the biggest screen you have with the best sound system available to you. The visual and audio craft deserves it. My final rating for Wednesday season 2 is 8.7 out of 10. I want to be specific about that number rather than rounding it. The things that prevent it from being a 9 are real, and I've described them honestly. The underdeveloped supporting arc, the occasional tonal inconsistency in the early episodes, the one slightly strained plot coincidence. These are not trivial complaints, even though they exist in the context of something overwhelmingly excellent. A true 9 requires near perfection across all dimensions. Season 2 gets very close. It earns a score that places it firmly in the conversation for the best television of its year, and that is exactly where it belongs. The one sentence justification Wednesday Season 2 is a rare follow up that doesn't just meet the expectations of its remarkable first season, but surpasses them by having the courage to go deeper, stranger, and more emotionally honest than anyone in the audience was fully prepared for. And here's the closing thought I want to leave you with. Wednesday Addams has existed as a cultural figure for nearly 90 years. She has been a cartoon, a film character, a television icon, a Halloween costume, a viral dance, and now a streaming phenomenon. And across all of those iterations, the thing that has made her endure, the thing that has made generation after generation of people look at this grim faced little girl in her black dress and recognize something, is not the darkness, it is the refusal. The refusal to pretend, the refusal to perform joy she doesn't feel, warmth she hasn't earned, connection she hasn't chosen. The refusal to make yourself smaller and quieter and less so that other people are more comfortable around you. This season doesn't change that refusal, it honors it. And in honoring it, it reminds everyone watching that the most gorgeous thing you can do is simply be exactly what you are, regardless of what the world around you expects that to look like. That's worth 8 hours of your time. That's worth talking about. And now, genuinely, thank you. Thank you for spending this much time in this conversation with me. I know this was a long one. I know we went deep. But if you stayed all the way through, you know that every minute of it was worth it because this show is worth it, and you are the kind of viewer who gets that. If this video gave you anything, a new way to think about something you watched, a reason to rewatch, a reason to finally start, I would love to know about it in the comments. Drop your thoughts down below because this is the kind of show that generates real conversation and I want to have that conversation with you. A few specific things I'm genuinely curious about. What was your reaction to the thing reveal? I want to know whether it hit you immediately or whether you needed a moment to process it. Because the range of responses I've seen to that specific plot point is genuinely fascinating. Also, how do you feel about what happened to Enid by the season's end? Is it devastating in the good way? Or does it feel like the show went a step too far? I don't have a settled answer on that one, and I genuinely welcome your perspective. And third, how does season 2 rank for you personally against season 1? Because I've told you what I think, but some of you are going to feel differently, and that disagreement is productive and interesting and worth having openly. If you are new to this channel, hello, welcome. The subscribe button is right there, and what we do here is exactly what we just did. Take the stories that matter, pull them apart, and understand them from the inside out. We do not do surface level, we do not do hot takes. We do the work because you deserve that and the material deserves that. And speaking of material that deserves that kind of attention, the next video on this channel is going to explore a film that came out within the same window as this season and has split its audience right down the middle. I mean genuinely divided, not in the way where one side is obviously right and the other side is obviously wrong, but in the way where both sides have a completely legitimate argument and the disagreement itself tells you something important about what the film is trying to do. I am not going to tell you which film it is today. You are going to have to come back for that. But I will tell you that it involves a director making the most divisive choice of their career, and whether that choice is an act of genius or a catastrophic miscalculation is something we are going to spend a very long time figuring out together. Stay curious. Stay honest about what you love and why you love it, and I will see you in the next one.